Hey there, my name is Alex, I am the Silver Mont, and this is my review of Nioh 2 on the PlayStation 4. Disclaimer time, Sony sent me a review code for Nioh 2 for review purposes. I received no monetary compensation or the like. Also, if the colours look a little funky in this video, that is because Nioh 2 supports high dynamic range and I was playing it with high dynamic range enabled on my TV, which, supports it, but the capture doesn't properly reflect that, meaning the colours might look oversaturated and so on. Of course, when you're actually playing the game on an HDR TV, it looks fine, it looks great. That out of the way, let's get started. Nioh 2 is a prequel and sequel to the first Nioh that came out several years ago. If you know what Dark Souls is, then Nioh is a Souls clone. If you aren't aware of what Dark Souls is, then Nioh is an action RPG based on a checkpoint system. Each checkpoint will restore your health, spells and everything, but also respawn all of the enemies, apart from bosses. For the most part, I will be framing much of this review with Dark Souls comparisons, and to reiterate a point I've made many times, when I call something a Souls clone, that isn't a negative. It is just a handy way of explaining how many of the game's systems will work by framing it with that comparison. First up, if you're coming into Nioh 2 as someone who played the first game, what is new? Well, not all that much in the grand scheme of things. In a lot of ways, Nioh 2 is almost like a Nioh 1.5. The graphics are more or less identical to the first game. There are several recycled maps from the first, along with most of the gameplay systems. The biggest changes would be the shifting abilities and the new weapons, and the character creation. To touch on the new weapons, Nioh 2 includes two new weapons. The magic scaling switchglaive that can transform almost like a Bloodborne hunter's weapon between a scythe and two other forms, and a pair of hatchets that can be thrown, if you're feeling like getting your Bardin Slayer action on. Nioh 2 also includes every weapon type from the first game. Sword, dual sword, axe, kusarigama, spear, and the two DLC weapons Tonfa and Odachi, like a greatsword. As for the shifting ability, in Nioh 2, you play as a half yokai or half fiend that you create yourself, who is then able to transform into a yokai, as well as take on their essence, or soul if you will, to use new special attacks. The shifting transformation is essentially the new version of Living Weapon, but the new abilities are, well, those are entirely new. If you hold down the right trigger and press a face button, you can do a counter or 3 special attacks depending on which yokai ability you have equipped. And those are one of the few entirely new things, along with the story. And Nioh 2's story is a good one, it's pretty long too. Once you beat the game, you unlock a sort of New Game Plus mode that gives much stronger items into the end game. There's a lot of hours you can get out of Nioh if you are looking for that. If you're just looking for the story mode, well, you can still get around 30-40 hours out of it, depending on how often you get stuck and how many of the side missions you do and so on. There are various multiplayer components of Nioh 2. When you're in a mission, you can choose to summon help from other players. Alternatively, you can do the expedition mode, wherein you find a player before the mission starts and then you tackle it together. Unlike summons in a mission who will vanish if they die once, in expedition mode you have a sort of co-op meter that is drained every time you or your summons go down, and then you can revive each other. But if the meter is drained completely, the mission will fail utterly, so you have to weigh the risks and rewards. If you summon somebody in the mission, or you die, the worst that happens is you're going to respawn at a checkpoint, whereas in expedition mode, you might have to do the entire mission over again. It goes without saying, expedition mode is generally better for playing with friends, whereas in-mission summons are better for random help. Another option for you are the benevolent graves. Returning from the first game are revenants, graves of other players, like bloodstains in Dark Souls, that tell you how the player died, but you can also summon a shade of that player, controlled by the game, to fight. And beating them will get you some items used for summons, and also Revenant has a chance to drop one of its equipped items, which can become relatively big in the endgame as people die whilst equipped with a good item, allowing other players to obtain that item as well. But now we have the new blue benevolent graves, where you can summon a friendly shade of another player, again controlled by the game, not controlled by the player, to help you for a while. If I remember right, the first game was only 2-player in co-op, whereas now it is 3, although these benevolent graves are of very limited use. as the AI on them is not great at all. Nioh 2 also has smaller system changes that won't be very interesting for a new player to hear about. For example, you no longer receive ninjutsu and onmyo magic points for leveling up the stats, but rather from using the abilities. Which obviously can mean initially you have no way of getting points, as you have no points to unlock the abilities, you need to get more points. But you can still get ninja locks and onmyo mage locks of hair that give you points. That's how you get the initial ones. Ki pulsing and stances work in much the same manner as the first game, but now enemies have 2 ki or stamina bars effectively. Once you drain their ki once, you can then flinch them with every attack, and if you drain that already drained bar, if you reduce their maximum to 0, the enemy will collapse, allowing you to perform a grapple or a critical attack on them. And most bosses in the game will usually enter the yokai realm once you start reducing their stamina enough. And reducing their maximum ki in this way will make it easier to put them into a critical state. Well, how about the story? As mentioned, it is quite long. Whereas the first Nioh told the story of William Adams, the first English samurai, and his adventures alongside Hattori Hanzo, serving Ieyasu Tokugawa at the Battle of Sekigahara and so on. The second Nioh takes place earlier in the Sengoku era, detailing the rise and fall of Hideyoshi Toyotomi, the second of Japan's 3 unifiers. The game spans decades, although that passage of time is not always keenly felt in the story, on account of the player character not aging, and very few NPCs showing any visible signs of aging. The player at least can be explained because they're half-blood heritage, meaning maybe yokai shiflings do not age, or age very slowly. And yes, that is one big change in Nioh 2. Instead of playing as William Adams, you play as Hide, a character that you customize and create yourself, male or female. The character creation system in Nioh 2 is pretty good and varied and allows you to make a character quite exacting. And it is easy to share your creations with others using codes. But I must admit, I preferred William. Whilst he wasn't overly colourful, he had his own personality and character that grew on me, and yet, despite creating the character this time, I had zero connection to them whatsoever. I don't really think it was a good idea, but I know a lot of people will buy the game just because they can make a cute girl in it. And a lot of people really do like making their own characters. I'm not a big fan of it in Nioh 2, as good as the creation is. See, Nioh 2 is almost more of like a Mass Effect situation where you are always Shepard, you just choose how your Shepard looks. Unlike Mass Effect, you have no control over Hide in cutscenes or, well, at all, really. Hide will make up their own mind, and sometimes the reasoning behind their actions can seem a little baffling, as you have no way of knowing what your character is thinking. No journal, no inner monologue, no living weapons or guardian spirits reflecting on your decisions, nothing. We don't even really know why the player character never talks, beyond Hideyoshi suggesting that we've taken a vow of silence, maybe? All in all, the story in Nioh is interesting, how they work in fantasy elements into real history, and if you're a fan of Japanese history of that period, you'll no doubt get a kick out of it. And yet, I don't think the story is as good as the first games, for a number of reasons. William serving as the catalyst for the player, a stranger in a strange land, worked a lot better. But it isn't terrible, and it definitely picks up a lot at the end, at the very end too. How about the graphics? Performance and so on? Well, you can choose English or Japanese for the voices in Nioh, and I would not suggest using the English ones at all. For starters, Nioh does an interesting thing where characters speak the appropriate language. William spoke English. Japanese characters speak Japanese. And the English dub would just seem really awkward and out of place because you're going to have the characters who should be speaking English, and then the Japanese characters also speaking English, and just, it's not going to be good, I think, to be honest. It would be like watching the Tudors in Japanese. Yamete Henry-kun. But the option is there if you really want it. As for performance, Nioh 2 has the action and movie modes. Basically, movie mode is 30 FPS and higher resolution, action mode is 60 FPS. It goes without saying, you should go for 60 FPS in Nioh 2, every time. The performance in 60 FPS mode, action mode, seemed really solid on my PS4 Pro. I didn't notice any frame rate problems. It's possible it did drop from 60 now and then, but it was never noticeable, and that's the important thing. The game always felt responsive and smooth. Loading times are fast, but I did have one crash during my playthrough, which I suppose is okay for, I don't know, however many hours I was playing, many of them. But annoyingly, it was on the most obnoxious boss when I was about to beat it. Speaking of which, well, let's do a kind of quick likes and dislikes to wrap this review up. What do I like about Nioh 2? The solid frame rate for starters. I love how the action gameplay is a take on Dark Souls, but elevates it to something new and actually improves upon it, instead of merely aping it. Instead of going, let's make a Dark Souls clone, it's like, what if we took a game more like Devil May Cry or Ninja Gaiden, and then put that into a Dark Souls framework? I would say the combat in Nioh is better than Dark Souls. Of course, it is very different too. Obviously, Dark Souls isn't meant to be a DMC style action game, it's quite accessible. So perhaps the comparison is a little unfair, but all the same, combat in Nioh is very satisfying and has a lot more depth than Dark Souls, Bloodborne, or Sekiro. The stance system is brilliant, and the weapons all feel very in-depth and well-balanced, and mastering them is a great endeavour. Every weapon in Nioh 2 feels really good to use. I like the cutscenes in Nioh, and the general presentation as well. I like the art style of the game. The enemy variety is pretty good, and most of the bosses were tense and exciting. Well now, how about the dislikes? The snake boss, right off the bat. The hardest boss in Nioh 2, for me and I imagine many others, is a very early boss. The problem with this snake boss isn't necessarily the boss itself, it's that you fight it too early into the game, before your build has a chance to have its tools. Let's say you're using an Onmyo magic build, or a ninjutsu build. You won't really have access to any of the things at this point that you need for your build, because you haven't had a chance to get them. So unless you're using a pure melee build or something, you're going to be gimped in the snake fight. If they moved it later in the game, it wouldn't be a problem. It just feels like a bad placement. Slight spoiler, there is a rematch of that boss near the end of the game, and guess what? He's fine then, because I actually have tools and my build has come together. There are also two giant bosses in Nioh 2, which follow a more Zelda-style pattern of do this to expose the boss's weak point and then repeat formula, which I don't think fits in this game at all. Thankfully, there's only two of them, but they are tedious and not fun. Next up, I don't like the yokai living weapon thing at all. In the first game, living weapon felt like a powerful super mode. When you're in trouble, or when you want to style on a boss, you would summon your guardian spirit and imbue it into your weapon and become indestructible, and start like destroying the boss or the enemy. In the second game, you transform into a yokai, and 2 seconds later, you're back as a human. It feels like they went, oh, living weapon was too good in the first game, so let's make it absolutely garbage and useless in the second game. Maybe it was too powerful, but they didn't have to make it useless. I think I probably used it 3 times in the entire game. Then the yokai abilities that are used, with the right trigger and the face buttons. The burst counters, R2 and circle, those are new, those are really good, I love those. But the other yokai abilities, the ones you get from enemies, they are good in concept, but bad in practice, because 90% of them are terrible and useless. They have very long animations, no iframes, and bad damage, so it's like, hey, let me just use this ability that's probably going to get me hit and not help me much. See, the thing in Nioh 2 is that you always want to be safe when you're doing your damage. You don't want to go into a really long animation when it's not safe, and that's what most of these are. So why would I bother wasting a resource on them? But then you have the snake boss's ability, which is comically broken and can trivialize a lot of the game because it is completely busted. There's a few other useful ones, of course, like the Onibar, the floating skull ones. Those just are kind of cool because they give you a little weapon buff. But the snake one is essentially the only one you want to have. They need to drastically balance them and increase the power of them, give them iframes or something. maybe nerf the snake one a bit. My suggestion would be either make all of them as good as the snake one, or make all of them good and make the snake one a bit less powerful by increasing the anima cost, the resource cost of it. Finally, my complaints in regards to the first Nioh still remain. The levels in Nioh 2 just aren't all that interesting, for the most part, to look at, I mean. Like, the level design is fine as from a gameplay perspective, but they're just a bit boring to look at. And the endgame does turn into infinite grinding again. I will say though, the levels have improved. There is at least one level that feels very cool and something that you would expect to see in like Dark Souls, for example. Back when Nioh 1 came out, I said, a lot of the game is generic castles or temples, but it is set in a fantasy version of real Japan, so I guess that's fair. But then Sekiro came out like last year or whenever, and has a very similar setting, but then we had some really cool areas in Sekiro, you know? So now there's no excuse. Nioh 2 improves upon it, but they need to look at it this way. Every mission or level in your game should be one that we can describe in hindsight. Take Dark Souls 1 for example. Yes, I can describe every area in that game, and you'll probably know which area I'm talking about. The poopy swamp, the drowned city, the lake at the bottom of the world, the city of the gods, you know? In Nioh 2, it's like the fire level, the temple, the other temple, the bigger temple, the smaller temple, the temple from Nioh 1. You know, there's not many levels I can describe that you'll probably know which one I'm talking about. They aren't memorable. The layout and design of them is fine, you know, interconnecting paths, shortcuts, all that sort of stuff you would expect from a Souls clone kind of game. They just need to be more memorable, the levels. So, in summary, if you liked Nioh 1, you're gonna like Nioh 2. If you didn't like Nioh 1, Nioh 2 isn't likely to win you over unless your only reason for not liking it was playing as William instead of creating your own character. I personally would have liked to see more drastic changes to presentation and in general, as right now this does feel more like a Nioh 1.5. That isn't a slight against the game though, really. That doesn't mean it's a bad game. There's loads to do in the game, it's a fun game. But it does feel iterative. Same UI, same menu, bunch of recycled levels and assets. I will point out, it's not really the main missions that are recycled, but a lot of the sub-missions, the optional missions, are recycled levels and maps. It's just my personal belief, but I feel like a sequel should only be called a sequel when it isn't something you can do in the first game. Nioh 2 could have been a big DLC, there's no reason it couldn't have been like an Iceborne style thing, for all intents and purposes. But that's just me. I have enjoyed Nioh 2 a lot, and I can definitely recommend it. To touch on difficulty, it's a decently challenging game, but much like Dark Souls, you somewhat choose the difficulty organically with your build, the amount of grinding you do and whatnot. That said, some bosses are pretty tough, and standard enemies can shred you in moments too. Personally, I'm looking forward to the PC version of Nioh 2. Which I think is where I'm going to put most of my time into. I kind of rushed the PlayStation 4 version because I was playing that game like 14 hours a day to get this review out for now. And I was using a ninjutsu build trying to be as OP as I could. On PC version, I'm going to take my time, play it with my friends. Because, you know, I won't need PlayStation Plus to play with my friends on PC. And I won't need to choose between action mode and movie mode. I can play movie mode with 60 FPS or higher. But if you are on console, it's definitely playable. PS4 Pro delivered what felt like a perfect 60 FPS, and even without PS Plus, I was able to use Benevolent Graves at least. And I imagine we'll be getting DLC for Nioh 2 as well, so maybe I'll catch you then. But more likely I'll cover it again when it comes to PC. Maybe I'll stream it, I don't know. But thank you so much for watching, take care and I'll catch you soon. Oh, and if you do want to see more Nioh from me, I did do a Let's Play of the first game. Not gonna lie, not very happy with that Let's Play. I don't think it's the best I could have done with it. But, you know, it was a learning experience. I don't think I'm gonna do a Let's Play for Nioh 2. Maybe when it comes to PC, I'll do like a 3-player Let's Play of it, or a stream. Who knows? But, again, until then, you guys take care. Ciao.